The Shepnaz Podcast begins now.
Welcome to the Shepnaz Podcast. I'm Joe, and I'm your host today. And the past couple days, we've been talking about kind of the status of our culture as it pertains to evangelism. And tonight, starting this Wednesday, 6:30, we're going to be having an evangelism masterclass. And Pastor Rob's got some curriculum for that. And so we're just going to give you a little bit of a preview of some of the things that are going to be talked about over the next few weeks. So Pastor Rob, welcome in.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. Yeah, super excited about this class tonight. If you haven't signed up for it, you don't need to. Just show up. That's the most important thing. Starts tonight. You don't have to make it to every single class. You can make it, whatever you can make it to is going to be helpful to you. But the idea behind this class is that it's just a class to really challenge our thinking in terms of sharing the gospel and to learn some ways to share the gospel. And it's a very creative format. So it's Louis Palau has put it together, his ministry. He's kind of like Billy Graham, because all over the world has great, huge crusades, won lots and lots of people to the Lord. But what they've done in this class is they've put together, there are 18 different leaders of ministries around the world, and they're sharing their thoughts and ideas about evangelism, and it all is kind of woven together with a cool thread on how it can work with us. So like this first class is Ed Stetzer, who does tons and tons of research for the church, and he'll probably share some really good information on where we are as a church and what the gospel is, but talking about being missional, and the fact that God really has chosen each of us to go into the world to be a part of the Great Commission. And sometimes we live our lives and think, well, the Great Commission applies to the pastors or my Sunday school teacher or my small group leader, but we're going to learn that the Great Commission really is for each one of us. And the nice thing about this class, the format will be, we'll hear from these different leaders, a short video, and then we'll discuss this. So it'll be an interactive class. It's not going to be like me lecturing or anything like that. It'll be discussion based on the content that's provided by the speaker. And there'll be two each night. Again, these are people who are out in ministry. They're not like sitting in some ivory tower just writing things that we should do that they're not doing. They're doing these things. And so that's that first lesson is going to be talking about the Great Commission, and that is it's for us. And then the next lesson we'll talk a little bit about the cultural atmosphere. We talked about that the last couple of weeks or last couple of days in the podcast.
Right.
And they're going to kind of deal with that and talk about how do we deal with some of the questions that people have regarding Christianity or spiritual things. And also to identify the fact that when people say that they're spiritual, that doesn't mean what it used to mean. Where, there was a day back in the day when people would say, well, I'm very spiritual or whatever. And the assumption was that they meant that they, lived according to the Bible. They had a biblical worldview, that God and Jesus would know, the Holy Spirit, all that was important. Spiritual today does not mean that. It can mean a lot of things.
Sure.
And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then talk some more about when you're sharing the gospel, or what are reasons that keep us from doing that? Mm-hmm. And I mean, you can probably answer this question. What is the number one reason people don't share the gospel?
Fear.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and there's all kinds of fears, right? Like, what are they going to say about me? Am I going to say something that I shouldn't say? Am I going to say something that makes them be lost forever? Am I going to say the wrong thing?
They're going to ask me questions I don't know the answers to.
Am I going to offend them? And I'm going to look like an idiot because I don't know the answers. Yeah. And so we'll talk about that and talk about how, just some of the barriers that we have to sharing the gospel, and that'll be a really good one. And just so you know, like I'm a pastor. I was a youth pastor for a long time. I've been in ministry since 1990. So what is that? 34 years.
Long time.
Yeah, and so I can still get nervous when I'm talking to somebody about the gospel because I recognize that someone's spiritual eternity is at stake. And I don't want to screw it up. I don't want to say something that I shouldn't say or something that turns them off. And believe it or not, that's one of my spiritual gifts. I can say things that turn people off in a minute.
Well, if it's any consolation, if he's given it to you, he knows who he's giving it to, right? So, I mean,
Yeah.
anytime we're faced with these opportunities, he knows who he gave the opportunity to.
I want to live like you and see people how you see them.
I want your mission to be my mission.
I don't want to shrink back from the big questions. Help me to listen deeply as you would.
God, so many things try to hold us back, but let your love speak louder than fear.
By your Spirit, Lord, remind me I don't have to be who I'm not.
I can connect compassionately out of who you made me to be, even out of my brokenness.
Lead me as I share the simple gospel.
Refresh me in the midst of resistance.
Fill me with fresh vision for the next generation.
And let me know the joy of connecting the people you love back to you.
Fear and discouragement can cause us to shrink back from sharing the good news, but spiritual openness is rising in the U.S. God is calling us to remember why He sent His Son, not to condemn the world, but to save it. If you'd like to learn more how to share your faith or sharpen up your skills on how to share Jesus with others, please join Pastor Rob starting Wednesday, April 3rd in the sanctuary for an 8-week class on sharing your faith. This 8-part video-driven course is full of inspiring stories and actionable challenges from 18 amazing contributors.
And that's a good thing for each of us to remember, that if you have the opportunity to talk to somebody, He's entrusted it to you. And the good news is that God loves a person more than you do, and He's not going to let you screw it up that bad, or He's going to maybe distract their mind. Rob is about to say something I don't want them to hear, so let me create a distraction. A squirrel runs by or something. But the Lord, so we'll talk about that. Then another thing that we'll talk about is finding an authentic evangelism style. And so we talked about this last couple of episodes when we talked about going door to door, and there was, evangelism explosion, and there's all these methods, all of these, the 4 spiritual laws or
courageous Christianity.
Questions. Yeah. And, models, and I learned acronyms of how to share the gospel and all that kind of stuff. It ends up being kind of a canned presentation.
Yes.
But one of the things that we'll talk about is in the culture that we live in, authenticity is really valued. And so how we share the gospel, like we don't want to just go into gospel mode and go through the 4 spiritual laws and ignore the context and the relationship and the things a person's going through. So we'll learn different styles, and there's different ways of doing it. I mean, there's a ton of resources out there for the church today that we can use, and the best one is the one that's easiest for you and the one that fits the situation. And so we'll talk about that. And then the other thing is we'll talk about how to start a conversation about the gospel. Like how can I start a conversation with somebody that I don't know about the gospel? How can I and sometimes that's easier than starting a conversation about the gospel with somebody that I do know and care about.
Yeah.
And so we'll talk about how can we weave these things in to our conversations and our relationships and our daily lives, and talk about, do I need to wait for the Lord to give me an opportunity, or do I need to be intentional and create an opportunity? So there's all those kind of things as well, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about elements of the gospel. Like, here are the things this is what the gospel is. Like, this is the, if you could distill it and say there's 3, 4, 5 ingredients, whatever it is, this is it. And however you want to weave it in.
Right. Here's your main talking points.
Right. Yeah. So we'll talk about that. And again, what we'll do is we'll be watching videos from people who are doing this and lead ministries. Then we'll talk about it in our groups together. So if your small group comes, you'll talk about it in your small group. If you're not in a small group, we'll get into groups, and we'll have people who will lead the conversation, and we'll just get things going and have conversation. And there's not a wrong or right answer, but the important thing is that we wrestle with this and we try to figure out how can we take the gospel to people who don't know Jesus. And then we'll talk about evangelism as a lifestyle. And then maybe one of my favorite ones is how to engage the next generation. And sometimes what generation people are a part of matters about how you communicate the gospel. And one of the guys who will be doing that, his name is Greg Steer. He's actually a friend of mine. and he leads an organization called Dare to Share. And he has used to do big conferences for teenagers. And when I was a youth pastor, I took my kids to it, and he would share the gospel in multiple ways, teach kids how to share it, and equip them to go out. It's different now. He does it differently now, but he'll be there, and he's just, nobody has more passion for the next generation than him. And so he'll be leading that conversation about how we can help deliver the gospel to the next generation. Because as they say, we're only one generation away from extinction.
Always.
And so we have to share the gospel and be relevant with the next generation. So that's the class. I'm super excited about it. These people that are going to be sharing in the class are just really going to be helpful to you. They're not like, you'd be talking down. They're like, this is what I do. This is what I struggle with. This is how I've overcome it. This is how you could do it. And then we'll just grapple together. And hopefully at the end of the class, we'll all walk away with, a good understanding of the gospel and how to share the gospel, and even multiple ways to weave that gospel into our relationships and conversations with different people at different times who are at different places. Because if you listen to the first 2 episodes this week, remember,
right,
we're talking to people who mostly are at a 2 as opposed to an 8. And real quick, just to say, back in 1964, most people, if 1 is like, I don't know God and I don't care about him, and 10 is, I'm ready to give my life to him, in 1964, they said most people are at an 8. They're really close, and it didn't take a lot to move them over from an 8 to giving their life to Jesus, which is a 10. But today, most of the people that we confront or deal with are at a 2 or a 3, and there's a long ways for them to go. And so how we share the gospel and the ways we share the gospel really have a lot to do with moving them from a 2 or a 3 to a 10 so that they're ready to give their heart to Christ. So the other thing that's important to note is that success in evangelism is not closing the deal.
Right.
I mean, sometimes we used to go out, door to door. It's like, how many people did you get saved or whatever. And you could base success on, well, how many people prayed the prayer. Success in the gospel is not closing the deal. Success in the gospel is preaching it.
Well,
it's putting the message out there.
And I also think, we've talked a lot over the past few months about our measures and things that we're looking at and being missionally successful and so forth.
Yeah.
And even our mission statement. Our mission statement is not the number of conversions or the number of baptisms or the number of church memberships. It's are we helping someone take their next step?
Yep.
And so that next step may be just getting them from a 2 to a 3. Maybe they go from a 2 to a 5. Who knows?
Yeah.
But we're just looking to say, okay, I care about these people around me. And that's, I think, where we have to start with evangelism is from the heart.
Yeah.
Do you care enough about people that don't know Christ that you're going to step outside of yourself, maybe something that initially seems uncomfortable, that you care enough about them that you're willing to do that for them?
Yeah, you're right. That's huge. And the authentic part of that is true. The other thing that I think is really interesting, and I'll close it with this unless you have more, and that is Phineas F. Brzee, who is the first general superintendent of the Church of the Nazarene, says this. He says, we are indebted to give the gospel to every person in the same measure that we've received it. And so if you have a relationship with Jesus and you know him, then we have a debt to everybody else to share the gospel with them in the same measure we've received it. Because somebody loved you enough to share it with you, and we have to love others to share it with them. That's the plan. It's plan A. It's the only plan Jesus has.
Right.
Like, it's not going to come another way. We've got to share the gospel. And so, I'm super excited about this. The class is 8 weeks long, so it starts that first Wednesday in April. Go to the end of May. Tonight, so it'll go to the end of May. So 8 weeks. I think there's one extra Wednesday in May. But it's going to be great. Again, you don't have to come to all of them, but once you get there, you'll see it's really good stuff, and hopefully you can. So come when you can, as much as you can.
Sounds good. All right. So if you haven't got it by now, we are starting an evangelism masterclass tonight at 6:30 in the sanctuary. And I just hope that right now you'd take a moment and just allow that name to come to your mind of somebody that you know, you love, that doesn't know Christ, and say, okay, I'm going to step outside of myself and I'm going to learn a way that I can share my faith to that person. Make sure that you follow along with everything that's going on at the church by going to shepnaz.org. Also, check out everything we do on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. For Pastor Rob, I'm Joe. Have a great day. This podcast is a production of the Shepherd Church of the Nazarene, Gahanna, Ohio. Email to podcast@shepnaz.org and let us know what you think.